Sure, yeah, you're welcome to.
Okay, thanks. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jackie from Hub City Bookshop, and tonight we have Alan Rossi with us. He's been kind enough to set aside an hour to talk about his debut novel, Mountain Road Late at Night. I'm just going to give a quick bio on him in a minute. But first, I do want to make a note that if you have any questions, just type it into the little chat window. And after he's done his reading and talked to us a little bit, we'll start asking him some questions, and I'll voice those to him for you. So just type anything that you want to know. And let me come over here. So we're going to introduce Alan Rossi. His first novel, Mountain Road Late at Night, was published in February of 2020. So it published first in the United Kingdom, Australia, and other countries. It's just come out here on Tuesday, and we're very happy to have it in the shop. His fiction has appeared in Granta, Conjunctions, New England Review, Missouri Review, Night Letter, and many other journals. His nonfiction novella, Did You Really Just Say That to Me?, was awarded the 3rd Annual New England Review Award for Emerging Writers, and he was the New England Review Bread Loaf Scholar for 2017. His fiction has received a Pushcart Prize and an O. Henry Prize. His work has been anthologized in Harper Perennial's 40 Stories, New Writing for Harper Perennial. He is a practicing Zen Buddhist in the Soto lineage, and he writes about Zen along with nature, frequently in his stories and nonfiction. His next book is a nonfiction novel called Our Last Year, in which the natural world is a character. The book follows the transformation of 2 lives parallel to the seasonal transformation of the planet. He lives in South Carolina with his wife and children, and he's joining us from here today. Thank you, Alan.
Yeah, thank you all from our guest room. Thank you all for coming. I will kind of jump right into this. I'm going to try to give you some idea of what this book is about beyond the jacket copy of it, and hopefully thereby make you interested in the book. Okay, so the basics of it are this. I'll read a couple sections too of different parts. Okay, so what you need to know about the book before I do some of this reading is that Nicholas and April, a father of a 4-year-old named Jack, have died on a mountain road late at night. And they kind of live off the grid. They live deep in the Blue Ridge. They're sort of judged for that by other people. And the novel is really about how the family members surrounding Jack deal with the deaths of Nicholas and April and try to understand who will be Jack's guardians. And there are competing ideas of who should take the boy, and that's essentially what the novel is about. So it's a slapstick comedy. It's real funny the whole way through. There's some humor in it, but it's a sad book. So, so be ready. I'm gonna bum you out for an hour now. Okay, so that's basically what the book is about. I'm gonna read the opening of it, and then I'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll read a couple other sections. Okay, so this is from the first section. It's Nathaniel's section. There are 4 sections in the book. There's Nathaniel, who is Nicholas's brother, the dead man's brother. There is Catherine's section. Catherine is the dead man's mother. There's Tammy's section. Tammy is April's mother, and then there is Nicholas's section. So the book moves backwards in time to Nicholas after the car crash, sort of trapped in the car on this road. Okay, so here's the beginning of Nathaniel's section. I'm gonna have to pick this book up. Okay. This is so weird. Am I gonna be in frame here if I do this? Okay.
Yeah, you're fine.
Nathaniel observed, alternating between varying degrees of clarity and confusion, doubt that resolved into certainty, which in turn morphed into questioning, his central role in the numerous discussions among the family members about where the boy should live, who would best serve as replacement parents, who had the necessary parental acumen, who had the finances, who would be dedicated, whose lifestyle the boy would most easily fit into, who was young, who was old, who had been parents, who hadn't, who was willing to do it again, who wasn't, who knew the wishes of the boy's parents and who only thought they knew, who was closest to the now gone family itself, the parents both dead in a car accident, and finally, who would make the boy immediately feel safe. None of these discussions yielded clear answers for Nathaniel, the dead man's brother, or anyone else. All the accumulated arguments were like an uncertain sea of information, Nathaniel thought. One point swelling into a wave of what felt like fact, only to have another point wash out that wave with its own relevance and truth. In this way, rather than revealing who could best help the boy, the debate among the family members in the first days after the accident left the continual, implied, unasked, but deeply felt question, what did the boy want and need? The answer was both too simple and too impossible to approach. Jack wanted his parents. Nathaniel felt that all that these conversations were doing and what they would continue to do would serve as a way for the family to act out their scripted roles without any of them seeing what was right in front of them. The day before, Nathaniel received a phone call from his dead brother's mother-in-law. She called to tell him that she had started driving Monday night and would continue for the next 4 days, since it was over a 30-hour drive from Boise, and she would arrive on Friday. She was sorry she couldn't be there sooner, but see, no one thought to tell her, the mother, that her daughter had been in this accident, had been killed, and plane tickets were way too expensive at this point. To which Nathaniel wanted to explain that there'd been a mistake, that he believed she'd been notified by the police. But before he could say anything, this Tammy woman had said, "It is what it is and it doesn't matter now." She said she was on her way and would pick up the kid on Friday afternoon in order to drive him back home, asking Nathaniel to please have a suitcase packed with a week's worth of clothes, whatever toys Nathaniel felt the boy needed or would want. He could ship the rest to her later, and then she ended the phone call by saying that she was appreciative of Nathaniel taking the time out of his schedule to look after the boy. Appreciative of Stephanie as well. Please tell her that. She knew that children weren't in their plans, so it was really great that for the past week they'd moved in and stayed with the boy in the house he knew, but not to worry. She'd be there soon and they could go back to their apartment and their lives. Nathaniel had then explained all this to Stephanie, his wife, that Tammy, a woman he had met only once and with whom he had never had a real conversation before, this woman didn't even say hello on the phone call. She just began talking, telling him that she was coming to pick up the kid with barely any acknowledgement that Nathaniel was even on the line. And then she gave him instructions for packing. Nathaniel told Stephanie that the mother-in-law basically patronized both of them by implying that these few days with Jack had been a burden for them. He told Stephanie that his brother's mother-in-law conveyed this information to him with such flippant urgency, almost an annoyance at having to convey it to him, so that he'd felt reproached and stupid, like he should have somehow known this information, and he hadn't known how to react to any of it, and therefore hadn't reacted, except to say, "Okay, that all sounds great, thanks, Tammy." Now, a day after that call, thinking about when to call this Tammy woman back and what he would say to her, Nathaniel watched Stephanie looking through the cabinets for what she said was a strainer. Okay, that's the opening of the book, and it kind of introduces, I don't know, I think of it as like introducing to the reader how I'm attempting to create the drama in this novel, which is something like this. The drama has already occurred. The car crash has already occurred. That's over with. The drama is all in the characters' minds. Nathaniel has a particular way of seeing things. Tammy has a particular way of seeing things. And for the next 200 pages, we're going to see Nathaniel's point of view. Then we're going to see Catherine's point of view. Then we're going to see Tammy's point of view. So it's deeply internal. There's a lot of thinking in the book. There's not a lot of plot. And I did this on purpose. I often, I mean, I love books with big plots, but I often read them and think, but I just sit at a computer all the time and read stuff, like that is not my life, And so my life just doesn't really look like that. And I wanted to write a novel that had some big loss in it, but that was very kind of normal. Like it was just people in rooms talking to each other, trying to figure something out. And I thought that that was worth exploring. I also thought that it was worth exploring how, everyone wants in this novel what is best for Jack, but everyone believes that they know what is best for Jack. And the notion in the novel has something to do, there's an epigraph to one of these chapters from the Dhammapada that says, our life is shaped by our mind, we become what we think. And this idea, the idea of this quote is that people rarely see reality. They only really see their own mind, and they call that reality. And that's the idea I wanted to explore, that we're constantly confusing what's in our mind for what's real. And that's where all the problems in this novel stem from. People are struggling to see outside of their own mind, although it does happen, and there are glimpses and there are connections that occur along the way. But that's the central drama of the book. All right, I'm going to read another passage from Nathaniel real quick. Nathaniel's standing out on the porch. There's a lot of standing out on the porch thinking stuff, as I said. So he's just standing out on the porch, and this is another aspect of life that I wanted to explore. Like, when I started writing this book, my daughter had just been born, and someone said to me and Emily, "Do you guys have a will?" And we were like, "What? Why do we need a will?" And they were like, "Oh, right, we have a child now, it really mattered." And so I thought, well, oh, wow, if someone hadn't talked to us about that and explained that we need to make a will and do all of these things now, it could have been a few years before we actually came to that. And so I thought, what if these people live off the grid, they're distanced from what we consider normal society, what if they never made one? And my daughter sleeping on the porch with me and me typing was how I began that, how I began thinking about this book. Okay, so at this point, Nathaniel's just standing on the porch and he's thinking about what he should tell Jack, along with what he's going to say to Tammy. He's thinking about how he should talk to Jack. I should get a drink of water. The wind picked up. Nathaniel felt a spray of rain on his face, and he noticed a deep, damp cold move through his body. He pulled his unzipped jacket together over his chest and then went back inside, gently opening and then closing the front door so as not to wake Jack. Stephanie was dumping the potato skins in the trash. He knew that his main job here should be to find some way to help Jack. But when he thought of how he might do that, he didn't know how. Was he supposed to explain to a 4-year-old how to understand where his parents were now? Were they anywhere? Did he invoke God? Was that something his brother had talked to Jack about? Did he go with the more scientific view that in nature energy cannot be created or destroyed, it can only change forms? And so Nicholas and April had simply changed forms and were actually everywhere. Jack wouldn't get that though. Or would he? Would Nicholas have said something more like that? It sounded a little like Nicholas, though he and his brother had stopped having those conversations years ago. And recently, in the last year or two, what they mainly talked about, or what Nathaniel mainly questioned Nicholas about, was when Nicholas was planning on returning to the real world, which Nicholas almost always deflected. They occasionally got into arguments, matters of perspective, with Nathaniel claiming that Nicholas had retreated from life, not just from society and thus community, which Nathaniel argued Nicholas could make change in, but also from the problems of the world. "You've created your own little utopia in the mountains while everyone else suffers," Nathaniel had told Nicholas. Nicholas claimed, in his cryptic, unrevealing way, that he didn't feel that was the case at all. That he wasn't looking for some separate peace, that this was his attempt to speak from his inmost intention, for his inmost intention to manifest as action, to which Nathaniel had said that it seemed selfish, and that actually it had all been April's idea anyway, and Nicholas was only following it out, seeing how some different life might feel. Nicholas had then quoted some old Japanese writer to Nathaniel, had actually sent Nathaniel an email which had said, "I think this explains my position best," though it hadn't explained his position at all. Nathaniel had not understood and still didn't, though he thought of it often and looked at the email often, looked at the quoted words like they were foreign objects from some other universe whose purpose and meaning he glimpsed intuitively, but with clear thinking he could not see. They were this: because the blue mountains are walking, they are constant. Their walk is swifter than the wind, yet those in the mountains do not sense this, do not know it. To be in the mountains is a flower opening within the world. Those outside the mountains do not sense this, do not know it. Those without eyes to see the mountains do not sense, do not know, do not see, do not hear this truth. They who doubt that the mountains are walking do not yet understand their own walking. Nathaniel had read the passage so many times he had it memorized, and he had asked Nicholas about it several times, only for Nicholas to respond that they'd talk about it in person when Nathaniel visited next. But of course that never occurred. Was it something about knowing nature, being close to nature, Nathaniel thought now? Something about people's oneness with nature? He thought of Jack again, of what Nicholas would say to Jack. It was impossible to know his brother's mind. Could he say to Jack that his parents had gone away, but they would return in another form, as grass or trees or a dog, or as the mountain, born again? But that didn't make sense. What did he even think? To him, his brother was just gone. So was his brother's wife, April, who Nathaniel liked in theory, but not always in practice. That's all he felt. Both were just gone. And he hated it. He didn't want them gone, especially his brother, but that's all that was left in their place, a goneness. Okay, so there's the next part. Okay, and so this is really early in the book. I read the first few pages. This is about page 20. And so this introduces another idea I wanted to explore, which was death. And kind of, not to sound too pretentious and heavy-handed, but the nature of reality and what happens after we die. And so it begins with thinking of how to talk to a child, and then the book moves to Nicholas's death. And for, let's see how many pages, I can't even remember how many it is now. For about 60 pages, it's Nicholas struggling to get out of this crashed car. And he is, I read a lot about near-death experiences. I read a lot about car crashes. This happens more frequently than you can possibly imagine. Someone crashes a car at night and then they're trapped in it and someone finds them the next day. A lot of the accounts I read, people lived, but like just barely. And then I read a lot about near-death experiences in car crashes. This is also kind of intermingled with a lot of Buddhist understanding, Tibetan Buddhist understanding of reality after death, things like that. But so that idea is introduced in Nathaniel's chapter, and then the book ends with basically a 60-page death scene. So anyway, okay, so, and I'm going to give you a little of the opening of that as well, just that chapter. Just because kind of I like it. I like that. I liked writing that chapter the most. It was the biggest challenge I've ever written, and I just kind of enjoyed doing it. Also, I've been in several car crashes, so I was like, I have some knowledge of this. Like, I can I can write about a car crash. Okay, so this is after the cars actually crashed, and this is Nicholas's chapter, the last section of the book. There was the ticking of the car's engine and the sensation of falling awake in the dark. The gray outlines of the interior of the car slowly materialized in the darkness. Steering wheel and dash and airbag and frame that once held the windshield. Then he felt his head pressed against the flat, almost carpeted surface, which he knew, after something in him made an adjustment, was the roof of the car, and that he was upside down in it, still in his seat, held by the seatbelt. In and through the grainy dark, the splintered windshield lay flat on the ground, grass flattened beneath the cracked glass. The ticking of the car's engine slowed. A humming of pain from some distant source, like a tuning fork struck gently, grew louder and more intense. He again felt himself almost falling into himself to the sound of the ticking engine. His vision darkened and he closed his eyes, and after a minute opened them. The darkness undimmed again, and there was the steering wheel, the deployed airbag, a pulsing pain behind his eyes that sent brief flashes of white into his vision, which slowly faded. Beyond the flattened and splintered windshield was the muddy ground, grass, leaves and brush outside the frame of the car, and further out, the forest. It was dark, but he could see, and suddenly he knew that the forest was lighted by moonlight, almost held by it, that silvery light. That humming pain grew louder. He closed his eyes, opened them again, and now saw the deflated airbag hung upside down from the steering wheel and was wet with blood and swayed gently. It felt like there was an optometrist clarifying his understanding of reality with each closing and opening of his eyes. The airbag swayed noiselessly, a drip of blood hanging from a corner. It occurred to him that the bag hung upside down in the same way that he hung upside down from the seatbelt. And yet he was still compactly in his seat, almost squished in it. And he realized through a wave of pain, suddenly the hum of pain crescendoed, that moved up his abdomen and back and into his neck. He realized that the roof of the car had been collapsed in the accident and he had almost been smashed. He felt his breathing get faster, shallower, trying to remember the accident, trying not to feel his body, which suddenly seared with heat and ache. The passenger seat, he could see by moving his eyes but not his head, was empty. Okay, and there's that. And so this is when he first realizes that April is not in the car with him. And like part of his struggle for the next, whatever, 40 or 50 pages or so is like trying to figure out where exactly she is. Yeah, and that's it. That's what I've got for you. So
Like tantalizing bit of reading.
What's that?
That was just enough. It was like tantalizing, made me want to read more of it.
Oh, cool. I'm so glad. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions about the book? Or?
So far, we're waiting for questions to come up, but I have a couple for you.
Okay, great.
Yeah, just while if people are contemplating what you said, that was some, I think, deep things to think about from the book. So,
yeah.
I was wondering, you mentioned the age of your daughter when you kind of had the idea that sparked the book. How long did you write it, or how long did you spend writing it?
I think I probably wrote the first draft in 8 months or so, and then Emily read. I mean, along the way, Emily read it. A couple people who are here, Eric Coker and Patrick Whitfill, they also read it and gave me a lot of helpful comments. And then I gave it to my agent, who edited it rigorously. And so we spent like maybe another year working on it before we even submitted it. So I maybe wrote in 8 months and then took another year or so to get in working order.
Did you enjoy the editing process, or was that more painful?
Yeah, except for one part. Well, no, there are two parts that were awful. One was getting Tammy's character right was difficult. There's in the book. I mean, there's other things in the book as well. Like there's class differences in the book. It deals with class in many different ways. And getting Tammy's character right took more work. And then getting the timeline right, because it moves backwards in time to the accident, was kind of maddening. I think I like bit the corner of a book at one point because I couldn't get the hours to line up, you know, like that thing. I think it was Suttree by Cormac McCarthy. And but getting the timeline right was really, really hard, and making sure all the hours lined up and that what was happening in one chapter had already occurred in this chapter. I mean, I talked about it with my editor, and we were both like, most readers probably wouldn't even notice this, but if it doesn't line up perfectly, it's just, it just has to. So it took a lot making it all line up perfectly going backwards in time.
What made you choose to do it with 4 characters? Because I'm sure that made the timeline complex.
Yeah. I mean, it's 4 characters, but it's just 4 sections. Like, it's not alternating points of view or anything. It's like, boom, you're in Nathaniel's head, and it's meant to be representative of that. Like, you're stuck in his consciousness, and then boom, you're in Catherine's, and you're stuck in hers. Um, and so, the real reason I chose all of that was purely intuitive, and then because I liked the symmetry of, I mean, it's Nathaniel and Nicholas booking it, and then Catherine and Tammy are in the middle, and so it's son, mother, mother, son, and I just liked the symmetry of that for some reason. That's really it. I just thought I just, yeah, enjoyed that symmetry.
Thank you. That was great. Appreciate the answer. Hannah says, which character was your favorite perspective to write?
I liked them all a lot, but I liked, Tammy's and Nicholas's were probably my favorite, because Nicholas's was so far out of my experience of something, a physical experience. So I really enjoyed the challenge of that. And likewise with Tammy, I enjoyed the challenge of being in a character's mind who um, I'm distant from or not as familiar with. I found it like very interesting to hang out with her and see what she was thinking and to see her points of view. Yeah.
So, based off of that, I had another question about what inspired those specific, did you have a person that inspired the character, or were they all kind of just created naturally?
I would say that all of the characters are in, pieces of my personality and pieces of people I know. And that through that combination and through that mashup, they begin to take on a life of their own. And I just follow that, but I take things that are interesting to me about other people and things that I'm personally interested in. Oh, wow, like a big owl just flew in our backyard. And
That's awesome.
And yeah, I just take things that are interesting to me about other people, or that I'm endeared to them, or that, I don't know, that I find endearing or interesting, and then things that I'm interested in, and mash them together, and then let the character go where they want to go after that.
Yeah, so you really kind of let them develop as well. That's great.
Yeah.
Dylan asks, or I think actually Tyler, sorry. How did you sustain a thought-based narrative as opposed to an action-based narrative?
That's a good question that is going to have a really lame answer, Tyler. Sorry. Tyler's one of my students, a very good writer in his own right. I think the answer to that question is that it's just kind of what I can do. I don't mean to be self-deprecating there, but it's just kind of what I can do. I don't know. I like stories that are plotted, and we read a really cool one recently by Ted Chiang that has a super sweet plot. And then whenever I read things like that, I'm like, that is super cool. And I'm like, I don't know how to do that, and I don't really want to learn. For whatever reason, I'm just drawn to the way people think. And so I know I can do that. And I also know that it's not going to be for everyone. Not every reader is going to be very interested in that. But for the person that is, I think I can make it interesting. And I think I can give surprises and insights and kind of, accurate emotional states, accurate psychological states. And I'm always thinking on every page, is there a surprise here for myself? Like, have I amused myself? Whether it's, and amuse just means, It can mean anything. Like, am I emotionally amused? Is this actually funny? Is this just a surprising thing to say? So I'm constantly just kind of checking, not when I'm writing. When I'm writing, I just go. But when I read back over it, like, am I amused by what's happening on the page and by the thinking of this character?
Um, so it kind of was like your own enjoyment to write this, it sounds like.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, yeah, sure.
That's really
Definitely.
awesome.
It
Um,
can't be a trudge.
good. Sophie asks, why did you decide on ending the novel with the crash scene rather than beginning it with the crash?
Um, well, the end of that's a good question. The novel plays with time at the end, and time like changes at the end, and you can kind of imagine maybe a little bit why. I mean, if I'm approaching the death of a character, what I view is like something that's happening beyond time all of a sudden, and so I wanted to explore the notion that though this accident has occurred in the past, it's, you know, it's always occurred. It's now, it's still happening now. And that like comes up at the end of the book in some way.
Thank you. Um, Hannah asked, kind of back to the character questions. Did you find it difficult to write in the mind of a female?
Um, that's a great question. For years, when I was writing, I don't know, in my 20s and maybe early 30s, I only wrote male characters because I was like, I'm not allowed, and I don't know how to write a female character. I'm not allowed. I can't do it. And I was like, and I also thought I can't do it. And then I got in touch with the female side of myself. um, I mean, but kind of actually, you know, what I began to understand, and I've said this in my classes before, is that I was like, no, there's no, I come from a mother and a father, just like everyone does. And we all have masculine characteristics and feminine characteristics. And that is definitely true. And once I started thinking about that more, and like many of my favorite writers are women. In fact, um, like Mary Gateskill, Rachel Cusk, I like gravitate more toward them. And and so once I allowed myself to feel that way and understand that, and I was able to start writing female characters, and I started writing them a lot. Like it was very liberating. And I don't know, you know, it's up to you to judge if you know I've done that well or not. Um, and but yeah, I really I had done it before this book. I had written stories that were published that featured, you know, female characters, and I really liked it. And so it was just, and the other thing I thought was I really want to write some older characters. I don't want it to be just a bunch of people in their 20s and 30s. And so that's the other thing I thought. And then I was like, oh, it's the mothers. I can write from the mothers' points of view.
Did Emily help with that too in the editing process?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Thomas asked, what was the most rewarding challenge in the writing?
I think, you know, I think getting the everything that happens for the 60 pages in the car crash right, you know, working to explain exactly how he's stuck in the car, how he eventually pulls himself out, and really creating a sense of, you know, the reader knows what happens. Nicholas is dead. We already know that. But I think that last chapter, I hope the last chapter, really, you're still like, want him to get out, you know, and he's getting out and he's working over these many hours to get out of the car. And so getting that right was, and having people tell me that that was moving was extremely rewarding. And feeling like I had accomplished it in a way that felt something close to realistic. It was like super rewarding.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Maddie asks, how different does the final version look from the rough draft? And were there any major changes that you made that you weren't sure of?
Hmm. That's a good question, man. It's been so long.
I
Let
know
me
you said
think
you
about
spent a
that.
lot of time editing it, so.
Yeah, let me think about that for a moment. It certainly changed a lot, but the general idea and trajectory of the book remained, the same. Tammy's chapter needed to be revised because she was too isolated. Essentially, one of the mechanisms in the book is that in the first chapter, Nathaniel is in the house with Stephanie, his wife. At some point, Nathaniel's mother and father, so the grandparents of Jack, they come over and they talk. And so there are people there. Nathaniel's somewhat isolated, but there are people involved. In the next chapter, Catherine, who is the mother of Nicholas, is just sitting in front of a computer talking to someone for the whole chapter. That's all that happens. And and so she's more isolated, but there's still a connection there. There's another person. And then in Tammy's chapter, she's driving across the country on this 30-hour drive. And so she's in her car alone. And like that was one of the like my agent was like, this is, I see what you're doing. And the end of the book is Nicholas in the trapped car alone. Right. And one of the epigraphs in the book is from T.S. Eliot, which is thinking of the key, each confirms a prison. And so what I was attempting to show with that is that like we're all trapped in some way in ourselves. And it's only through other people that we get out, that it's only through connections with other people that we escape that and the world in general, right? So I was isolating characters more and more, and Tammy driving across the country was too isolated. There wasn't enough. There wasn't another character to like play off of, and like her new husband existed, but he was like really minimal. So I had to like really rework her chapter to give her another person to play off of, and it's the phone. She calls him on the phone throughout the drive, and that's who she plays off of, and that gives her character a sort of more nuance. But I discarded a lot of Tammy's because it was just the chapter was too like isolated and contained right before Nicholas's. It needed to breathe a little bit more. It needed to be a bit more open. So that chapter changed a lot. I think also probably the novel was 20,000 words longer, which, but which, 10,000 of those was, and like kind of an epilogue type thing that I immediately was like, no, I'm going to destroy that. And then like 5,000 or 6,000 of those was introductory stuff that was me just exploring character that just never, I knew, at some point I was like, this isn't actually part of it. It's just like generative stuff. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that sounds like a lot of work to organize all that. And Catherine wants to know, was the setting inspired by anything? And I know there's multiple settings, so I'm assuming she means the mountain setting, but
Yeah, I love the Blue Ridge. I lived in East Tennessee for a bit, and my family and friends go hiking up there. I think it's beautiful, and uh, I also go meditate in a cabin near there, like I'm in this really remote place in the middle of nowhere every year. Maybe not this year, and um, and that like really impacted how or what I wanted to write about. The experience of being there and being quiet for 3 or 4 days and barely talking, like it allows other things to get in, and the place just like sort of seeped into my body, I guess, in my mind. And so really the cabin in the book is based on that place I go to.
very cool. Um, Cameron asks, how do the characters' opinions change as the novel progresses back to the crash?
um that's a really good question. I feel like they all become, I mean, hopefully, uh they all sort of move toward more openness. The characters are constantly attempting to be open with one another, attempting to communicate, and then thinking they have the right idea. and then separating again. And so I think there's this constant kind of transformation between being closed and being opened, or being closed and being open with each other. And I think there's a general movement for each of the characters towards some understanding that this situation is beyond their own self-interest and maybe beyond even what they think is right. And I think that that's the general movement for each character.
Thank you. Catherine asked also kind of a character-related question. She said, was it hard to maintain the characters' arcs with the story moving backward?
No, I mean, it was hard to get the timeline right between the characters, but it wasn't difficult to maintain their arc simply because it was so contained in one section. I wasn't jumping between characters. You know, I knew that there, you know, what I really like to do, or how I really like to write, is just to give characters a situation to wrap their mind around. In this case, it happens to be a car crash and dead parents and a boy who needs a home. And so I trust that, you know, I don't know how to put it exactly. I just try to sense the emotional reality of the character thinking about those particular circumstances, and I trust that their kind of response to this circumstance will lead me to, you know, some psychological or emotional truth by the end of the chapter. I may not even know what it is, but I just kind of trust that that'll happen. So I don't worry about the trajectory too much.
Hayden asked, kind of related to that, which I was also wondering, which section did you write first? Like, did you write it in the order that it appears, or?
I did write it in the order that it appears, although, yeah, I started with Nathaniel. I knew that for some reason I wanted to explore that character, and then I knew, and then once I thought about all the characters, I understood the structure of the book, and I knew, okay, I'm doing Catherine next, I'm doing Tammy, and that's what I imposed that on myself. I was like, okay, I have to write it in this order, and I'm not allowed to write Nicholas's chapter yet, even though I did cheat a little bit and I wrote some of his opening and stuff as I was writing some other parts. But the reason I did that is because I was so excited to try to write that last chapter that I knew it would give me kind of motivation to continue the project. So it's just like an internal reward system. Like if I can write these characters, then I can get to do this other thing that I really, really want to do. But yeah, I totally wrote them in order.
But it sounds like you kind of had the characters plotted out a little bit ahead of time.
I knew who they were. I didn't know what was going to happen or what they were going to do, but I knew that, you know, Tammy would be in this hotel room, or sorry, Catherine would be in this hotel room talking on the computer, and then Tammy would be driving across the country. That's all I really knew. I didn't know what was going to happen. And I knew Nicholas was going to be trapped in the car. And so I saw all of those things. And yeah, that's all I really knew.
Jennifer says, I read and loved this novel late last spring. Any thoughts on publishing this book into a pandemic and your reader's connection in isolated circumstances?
That's a really good question. Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. That's, I'm so glad you liked it. Yeah, I think that there have been different responses from different readers. Some readers find the book too isolating. You know, it's kind of it's kind of an emotionally grueling read. I've heard that said. You know, it's a hard book in regards of it's a family dealing with loss in a very kind of direct way. You know, I'm not really. I'm just letting a family be a family and think things out. And so I think some people have found that, especially during the pandemic, like, no thanks. I don't want to do that right now, you know, like I want to, which I get, that makes a lot of sense to me. That's really fair. So, and I also feel that way too, some of the time. And so, and at the same time, other readers have, people who have experienced the book have said like, you know, this is helpful in the sense that it's a reminder that even though this hard thing is happening and isolation is occurring, um, there is comfort inside it, and that's one of the things I hope the book offers as well. Is that despite these circumstances, there's like there is comfort to be found between people, with each other, and kind of with the the larger world. You know, like Nathaniel says, nature. So those are the two responses I've heard. One, the book is like a little hard because there's so much isolation in it. And then the other thing is like, I'm feeling this way, so I really related to these people and it gave me comfort.
Really interesting across the board that you had so opposite responses to it.
Yeah, there were differing responses for sure.
I did notice that a lot of the blurbs posted online about your book say that it does really well with evaluating like difficult circumstances and helping people through things. So I thought that was really, really interesting. What are you working on now? I know I read a little bit about it. It's like a story with nature as the character. Was that kind of inspired as you were writing this book, or?
No, totally different book. It's I'm calling it a nonfiction novel. It's about two people and their relationship. No one dies in this book. Hopefully it's funnier. And also, yeah, character is in nature in this really strange way. I don't remember how I came upon this, but I was like, I don't think anyone's ever written like nature as a character. And so there are different aspects. Like in one chapter, there are these two people and you're moving back and forth between them. And then literally between them, the sections between them, it's like, I'm just describing, cicadas and like a cicada's life cycle, or I'm just describing how certain flowers grow, and very specific, like the chemical processes, the biological function of the cicada. And what's fun about it is that all of that stuff, which is scientific, becomes like metaphorical. It just turns metaphorical on its own. And so that's another book I've already written, and that I'm about to try to work on selling.
Did you have to do a lot of research before that book like you did? You said you researched a lot about car crashes and stuff before Mountain Road Late at Night.
Yeah, I did I did some very basic research on, I don't know, a lot of online reading about cicadas, what their life cycle is, and how exactly flowers work, these particular types of flowers. A couple things about thunderstorms that like move all the way across the country, like start on one side of the country, are generated by the heat of the sun on the surface of the planet, all of that, and then like move across the country. So just really fun, basic kind of earth sciences stuff. But I liked it. It was fun.
Back to the car crashes, Dorothy asked, how did you explore the roles and reactions of the larger community to the car crash? She says, Nathaniel's imagination of how the town viewed him was one of my favorite passages.
Oh, cool. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was a fun part of the book to write, because I think we're always imagining, how people see us. And so that is a big part of Nathaniel's chapter. He is curious about how the town sees him. And that's just based on my own understanding of how people think. When something happens, we begin to imagine these scenarios of what people think about it. And we sort of can't help it. I just think that's how we all think. David Foster Wallace says something that's like this: if we knew how little other people thought about ourselves, we wouldn't go on worrying so much about what they think about us. And the basic idea of that quote is just that like we constantly worry about, what I said and what this person thinks about what I said. And we can't help it. It's really hard to not do that. But it's a part of my life. It's very real. And so it's definitely a part of Nathaniel's chapter as well. And I just thought in a town like the one I described in the book, they're all going to have some opinions about all the stuff. And it was fun to write that. Those were hopefully some of the funnier parts of the book that I didn't read tonight.
All right, that's perfect. As far as like the reactions of the community, sorry about my cat. Did you have to also, was part of that in your research? Like, did you see reactions in some of the research?
No. That's all fictional. I made all of it up. I might be totally wrong. Hello, cat.
Sorry, she really likes it when I'm holding still for a long time. There's not any other questions coming up at the moment. Is there any other parts of the book that you really liked or really wanted to talk about?
No, I think that's really it. Thank you all for the support. Thank you for the good questions. I hope I answered those adequately. I feel like it's really hard to talk about that, and I have no idea if I'm conveying things clearly, but thank you so much.
No, I think you did wonderful answering all of our questions, and I loved the reading that you gave too. I can't wait to finish the book. So also, we've got a couple, Sarah and Reed say thank you. And Sophie says thank you, and Garrick says thank you. So I think everyone really enjoyed your talk. Thank you, Alan.
Yeah, thanks guys. Thanks for coming, everyone.
All right, everybody. We will see you next time. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Alan. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Hub City. Bye, y'all.